but we need the help. We need the help. We need to make sure you have some financial commitment. For those that can, I would encourage you to try to look at joining the Alabamans. It's a $5,000 a year contribution, or you can raise it. But as we move out of the pandemic, we're going to have some really cool things going on. Very special, a trip to Washington. Who knows, we may get a former attorney general again to come live and in person at some point. But please take a look at doing that. But tonight I want to get started on this program because the topic with voting rights is so important. We see what's happening across the country. And voting rights has always been at the top of the list of issues that Alabama has had to deal with. But now more than ever, we see it not just in Alabama and the South, we see it across the country. And it is a huge problem that we've got to figure out what to do. And tonight, our guest is somebody who's devoted his career to civil rights, human rights, and voting rights. Eric Holder was the 82nd United States Attorney General. He served with me when I was U.S. Attorney. He was the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, which means I had to answer to him more than I like to, but he was a great boss to work for. He really was. He and Janet Reno made such a great team together. Since his leaving office, Eric has really spent a lot of his time, not only in a law practice, but he's also been as the chair of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. The redistricting issues are so important to the future of this country, and we've seen what's happened before. So although he's not in office, he's never been out of the limelight. And a lot of people may not know this, but Eric's wife, Sharon, is from Mobile, Alabama. Her name's Sharon Malone from Mobile, Alabama. And to show you another little interesting piece of trivia in Eric and Sharon's connection to Alabama, Sharon's sister, Vivian, was one of the two kids blocked at the schoolhouse door by George Wallace in 1963. I had the honor a couple of weeks ago of giving the induction remarks when Vivian Malone Jones was inducted into the Alabama Women's Hall of Fame. I know Eric and Sharon and the whole family are so proud of that. I was honored to be a part of that. So you're in for a treat tonight. He's a great guy, a great friend. I'm looking forward to hearing his remarks. I'm going to, at this point, turn it over to my buddy, the 82nd Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder.
All right. Well, thank you, Senator Jones, for that kind introduction. And Louise, it is great to see you. The notion that I was ever Doug Jones's boss is almost laughable, ladies and gentlemen. If you know Doug, Louise, I'm sure can talk about this, giving him orders or giving him direction, you give him suggestions. And that's about as far as it went. But he's a good friend, was a great U.S. attorney, and was a great senator and has been a real advocate for all the things that I think make this nation great. I also want to thank Chairman England for inviting me here. I'm honored to have the opportunity to speak with all of you tonight about voting rights and the redistricting process. And Congresswoman Terri Sewell is here with us as well, a person who I've worked with over the years, and especially on this fight that we have against gerrymandering. She has been a real guide for us. She has been an ambassador for us. She's been a tactician with us. You couldn't ask for a better friend or a better ally than Terri Sewell. So let me begin with the big picture. I think that we're at a moment of reckoning in America. Over the past few years, Republicans have used really a wide range of strategies to suppress the vote of the people, from gerrymandering to voter suppression to outright intimidation. They've gone to unbelievable lengths to stop people from voting. You would think that losing control of Congress, losing control of the presidency would cause them to change their approach and work to appeal to more voters. They did that before. They had an autopsy, I think they called it, try to figure out what they did wrong, how they could increase their appeal to more people. Well, the behavior that they have engaged in is unacceptable, and there's no rationale behind it. It is simply Republican lawmakers believing that it is their right to handpick who has the power in this country, and that it is their right to pick whose voice and whose vote should be heard, whose vote should be counted. And the South has been particularly hit hard with these Republican tactics, from Georgia to North Carolina to Florida, and in your home state of Alabama. The right to vote is under attack. and it has become increasingly more challenging to exercise, our country's most basic freedom. And it's being done with a complete disregard for or in total opposition to communities of color. Furthermore, Republican legislatures are enacting these gerrymandered maps that double down on the egregious maps that were drawn a decade ago. I mean, they drew a whole bunch of gerrymandered maps in 2011. Princeton University did a study and said that those were the most gerrymandered maps of the past half century. Well, they're building on what they drew a decade ago, diluting the voting power of communities of color and annihilating competitive seats. Just last month, Alabama Governor Ivey signed discriminatory maps that were drawn behind closed doors and to dilute the impact of communities of color. Republicans think that they can get away with this gerrymandering and not be held accountable by the public and by the courts, but they're wrong. Shortly after the maps were signed into law, a group of individual voter plaintiffs, with the support of our 501c3 National District Redistricting Foundation, we filed a lawsuit arguing that the Alabama congressional map dilutes the Black voting strength, the voting strength of Black citizens throughout the state. Between 2010 and 2020, Alabama's Black population grew while the white population fell. Now, according to the 2020 census, Black Alabamans now compose more than 27% of the state's population. And despite that growth and the fact that Alabama's Black population can support 2 majority Black congressional districts, the maps that were drawn further entrench the state's white majority and include just one majority Black district. But the redistricting process and voting laws, they don't have to be like this. And our future doesn't have to repeat the painful experiences of the past year. By supporting fair maps, strong Democrats, and impactful pieces of legislation that protect the values of our nation, like the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, we can put a stop to this endless assault on voting rights and democracy. It's important that everyone understands that this fight is urgent. This fight is real. Creating fair and just elections is how we create a fair and just democracy. And with a truly representative democracy, we can make progress on issues like employment, education, healthcare, housing, civil rights. This is how we protect the right to fair representation for people across the country. Now before I turn it over to Jessica for some questions, I'd like to just say that, I think that the defining political fight in America at this moment is not over a specific policy issue, but it's over the very nature of our democracy itself. Now, on the other side is a political party that is comfortable bending or even breaking the structures of our democracy to maintain majority rule, even when they have minority support from the people. They are comfortable. This is a hard thing to say, but I think it's true. They're comfortable with the notion of a political apartheid, where they are in the minority, but they exercise majority power. And so inaction is no longer an option. It is not an option when it comes to voting rights. So we have to work together. We have to elect strong candidates. We have to support the Democratic Party all around the country, and especially in Alabama. That is how we get our country back on track. That is how we strengthen our democracy. That is how we create that beloved community that John Lewis talked about, so much. This is within our power, but it will only happen if we work for it, if we commit ourselves to it, if we're willing to sacrifice for it. And we have to start at the state and local level, supporting great candidates that I know exist in Alabama, supporting great candidates like Terri on the federal level, the Congresswoman Sewell on the federal level. This will require additional funds, resources to get the job done. But even more than that, it will involve the participation of people like you all around the state to make our quest for a more democratic nation, that more perfect union, to make that real. We can do this, though. We can do this. Dr. King said that the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. But here's the deal. It doesn't bend on its own. It only bends when people like you put their hands on that arc and pull it towards justice. And so I'd ask you to ask yourselves, What are you doing to bend that arc and pull it towards justice? Are you supporting candidates? And are you supporting the Democratic Party? That is a way in which you can pull that arc towards justice. Are you participating in electoral activities, registering people, doing all kinds of things like that? That is how you can pull that arc towards justice. We can do this. It won't be easy. There'll be setbacks. It won't be a linear, a line straight to the progress that we need, but we can do this. And that's why I'm really glad to be here with you tonight and be surrounded by these great Alabama Democrats. And I hope, as I said, that you will do all that you can to support them in the months and years to come.
Thank you so much, Attorney General Holder, for that informative and inspiring address. As many of you already know, I'm Jessica Washington. I'm the political director at the Alabama Democratic Party. Attorney General Holder, we all appreciate you being here today, obviously, and sharing your perspective regarding the struggle to protect our voting rights. And now I want to take a moment to open up the questions, which will be brief. And for those who are viewing, feel free to submit questions using the Q&A button at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. So first question for you, Attorney General Holder, what are some recent examples of gerrymandering what are some recent examples of how gerrymandering has affected the outcome of an election?
Well, gerrymandering has a very powerful impact on our democracy, especially elections. In the years leading up to that last redistricting cycle in 2010, Republicans strategically worked to elect GOP Republican majorities in state houses and governorships across the country. And they did so with the explicit intent of controlling and manipulating the redistricting process, and they were real successful. I mean, for example, Michigan, it's a competitive state. A fair congressional map should reflect a slight Democratic lean of its voters as a whole. But in 2012, following that partisan Republican gerrymandering, President Obama won the state along with Senator Debbie Stabenow, but Democrats only held 5 out of the 14 congressional seats. At that time, Michigan had a Republican governor, a guy named Rick Snyder. So you can see that the political leanings of voters there were clearly not represented in the elected politicians within the states. If you look at what happened in 2011, it was an enduring gerrymandering. The Associated Press found that even in 2018, when there was that blue wave, Republican gerrymandering from 2011 prevented Democrats from winning an additional 16 seats in the House of Representatives. And so we've seen it in Texas. We've seen it in just states all around the country where that gerrymandering of 2011 had a decade-long impact, and it's why we were bound and determined to make sure that we make the process in 2021 as fair as it can be, so we don't have another decade of Republican minority rule in so many of the states in this country.
Thank you. The second question is, what are some of the most gerrymandered districts or states that you've seen?
Yeah, I think, the states that immediately come to mind, Jessica, I guess are Texas, Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, where the Republicans maintain control over the whole process because they have both the governorship as well as the state legislature, or in North Carolina, the governor does not play a role in the redistricting process, even though we've got a great governor, the Democratic governor there in Roy Cooper. So we've seen egregiously gerrymandered maps coming out of Texas, and in Georgia, the proposed maps are really not representative of the population there that recently elected Senators Warnock and Ossoff. There's no legitimate justification for the actions of our political opponents. Again, these Republicans have no qualms about bending or breaking the rules for their own gain. And so, these same legislators that showed their true intentions when they pushed for these new voter suppression bills earlier this year are the same ones who are now pushing for to stop a fair redistricting process. They go hand in hand. Voter suppression, along with partisan and racial gerrymandering, are a part and parcel of the same thing.
Thank you. The next question is, can you give us a brief summary of what happened in North Carolina with the court decision today?
In North Carolina, okay, I don't even know. I'm a little behind on that one. I don't know what happened in North Carolina today.
Okay, no worries. We'll skip to another Alabama focused question. But this one you may have some advice on, but the question is, what advice could you give to helping around strategies for getting curbside voting available in Alabama?
Yeah, I think that, it's one of the more pernicious things that you've seen Republicans do, not only in Alabama, but around the country. We had the greatest turnout ever in 2020. People in the middle of a pandemic found ways to vote because, dedicated elections officials, and to be fair, these were Republicans as well as Democrats, in most places, came up with ways in which we allowed, mail-in votes, curbside drop-off. And now Republicans have made the determination that if too many people vote, they can't win. And so they're trying to cut back on the ways in which people can cast ballots. I think that one of the things you've got to do is we tend to underestimate the power that we have as so-called ordinary citizens. Petitioning the state legislature, making yourself known to your state legislative representatives, protesting, coming out, texting them, calling them, doing all the kinds of things that are necessary. Obviously, the courts are places that can be considered as well, but these are legislative determinations that have been made around the country, and making sure that for those people who don't support the right of people to get to the polls and to cast a ballot, to make sure that they suffer an electoral consequence is something that's important as well. But I really do think that, being vocal about this, massing and protesting and raising your voices and making your physical presence obvious in support of things like curbside drop-off and vote by mail. These are the kinds of things that I think are really important and can move even what seems like the most intransigent, legislative bodies.
Thank you. And then our final question is also from the audience. And the question is, can you explain a little bit more about how gerrymandering works?
Yeah, I mean, gerrymandering, there are two kinds of gerrymandering. You gerrymander on the basis of what's called partisan gerrymandering. We are trying to have a negative impact on the other party's ability to elect representatives consistent with their support. There's also racial gerrymandering, where you're trying to prevent a particular race, African Americans, Hispanics, from getting the ability to select candidates consistent with their numbers in a particular state or jurisdiction. So that's racial and partial gerrymandering. But gerrymandering itself is accomplished by drawing lines in such a way that you favor one party unfairly over the other one. And you do that by, drawing lines where you pack, for instance, all the Democrats into, one district so that you have fewer Democrats around in other districts. And in that way, you can have more Republican districts than maybe that singular Democratic district. So that's called packing people together. You can also do it by cracking people, by looking at substantial numbers of African Americans, Democrats, whatever the demographic, and then splitting them into a whole variety of districts, and you lessen their power that way. So maybe if you've got a state that has, I don't know, maybe 50% Democrats, but if you put them in different districts in small numbers, you can decrease the power that they have. And so you do racial or partisan gerrymandering, and you accomplish it by cracking or packing the people that you're trying to discriminate against. And we have seen that done by Republicans all around the country. It is something that we are fighting. It's why we have brought lawsuits. It's why we have supported candidates who would stand for a fair redistricting process. It's why we supported the creation of independent commissions to draw the lines instead of self-interested politicians. But the Republicans have been really breathtaking in what they have done so far in Texas, especially in Georgia, what they've done in North Carolina. We're going to be in court in a lot of different places trying to push back against what Republican-dominated legislatures have done.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that concludes all the time that we have for questions. Thank you again for your time and insight, Attorney General Holder. Hope you have a great night, and we will now hear from some of our supporters of the Alabama Democratic Party on why they chose to support this vital work.
Hi, my name is Rachel and I'm a librarian from Los Angeles, California, and I am a proud supporter of the Alabama Democratic Party. Voting rights have never been more important, and defending this fundamental right has never been more impactful. I believe that the Alabama Democratic Party can fight voter suppression, and I am proud to support them in this work. Victory at the polls is not a given. It depends on organizing and advocating now. I'm proud to be part of the Alabama Democratic Party, and I'm proud to be a part of this fight, and I hope that you will join me. And now, a man who needs no introduction, DNC Chairman Jamie Harrison.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Rachel, for that introduction. Thank you all so much for your support of the Alabama Democratic Party and for our most sacred right, the right to vote. You know, the right to vote is deeply, deeply personal to me, and I'm sure it's the same for many of you. Before my grandfather passed in 2004, we always used to vote together. That was our little tradition. It was actually one of the last things we did together before he passed away. He was in a wheelchair at the time because of his diabetes, so I wheeled him to the polls, we voted, and we came home. Afterwards, we were sitting out on the porch talking about whatever, and after a while, the conversation got serious. He grabbed my arm and he said, "Baldy," because that was my nickname. I've sort of always had this bald, round head of mine. He said, "Baldy, we voted today, and you know, I couldn't always vote in the state." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You know, growing up in South Carolina, they didn't always see your grandmother and me as whole people." I said, "Yes, sir, I know that." He said, "Let me tell you something. Never let anybody tell you that you don't matter. Never let anybody tell you or say that you don't count." And that is what is so special about the vote. It is the great equalizer. Doesn't matter if you're president or if you're billionaire or if you pave roads like my grandfather or pick cotton like my grandmother. You get one vote. And that vote is proof that you count, that your hopes matter. It's proof that your elected officials work for you, that they have a responsibility to deliver for your community. And that's why the Alabama Democratic Party and folks like Congresswoman Sewell and Senator Jones and Attorney General Holder are working so hard to make every voice heard. It's why the DNC invested $25 million to expand our I Will Vote initiative and to build our largest voter protection team ever. And it's why we will keep fighting to pass the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act in Congress. We won't stop until every voice and every vote counts. History will remember that the Democratic Party was a party of voting rights. So thank you all again for all of your hard work. It is indeed an honor to be in this fight with each and every one of you.
Thank you, Rachel and Chair Harrison, for their contribution to this event and their investment in the Alabama Democratic Party. Now, at this time, we are going to kick off our panel discussion with our amazing guests, Congresswoman Terri Sewell, Mayor Randall Wolfen, and Attorney April England Albright. So first, we want to do a quick round of introductions, starting with attorney England Albright. For more than 24 years, she has worked and litigated in the area of civil and voting rights. She also has her own law firm focusing on cases which address discrimination in the workplace and voting rights. She's then a supervising attorney at the Department of Education in the Office for Civil Rights. Miss England Albright, we are thrilled to have you join us, and we look forward to hearing more about your insight and your perspective. Next, we have Mayor Randall Wolfen. It's great to see you as always. Mayor Wolfen is the 34th and current mayor of the city of Birmingham. He previously served as the president of the Birmingham City School Board from 2013 to 2015, and as a city attorney for Birmingham from 2009 to 2017. Thank you as well for being here. And last but not least, Congresswoman Terri Sewell. So happy to see you as well. Congresswoman Sewell has served since 2011 as a United States Representative for Alabama's 7th Congressional District, which includes most of the Black Belt, as well as portions of Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, and Montgomery. Thank you as well for being here. So we're going to just dive right into it. We want to start the discussion with some context on Alabama's place in the renewed fight. Congresswoman Sewell, your district knows well that Alabama has always been the main stage for voting rights. So how do these threats to voting rights we are facing today echo our past struggles?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jessica. And I want to thank all the other panelists on tonight's Zoom, as well as Doug Jones and Attorney General Holder for being our very special guests this evening. You know, I grew up in Alabama's 7th Congressional District, and when I think about the history of Alabama's 7th Congressional District, it is a history filled with ordinary Alabamians, ordinary Americans working together to achieve extraordinary social change. It includes the cities of Birmingham and Montgomery and Tuscaloosa and Marion and Selma, my hometown. In so many ways, this fight for voting rights is personal to me, having grown up in Selma, Alabama. Nothing is more fundamental to our democracy than the right to vote. It was John Lewis who said that the vote is the most important nonviolent tool in our democracy. And what we have witnessed is old battles becoming new again. While we no longer have poll taxes and we don't have to count how many marbles are in a jar, modern day forms of voter suppression are no less pernicious. They are the reason why it is so critically important that we get the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act across the finish line and onto the desk of the president. I'm honored to have been the lead sponsor on HR 4, the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and I'm proud to say that we passed it in the House of Representatives in August, a record 218 to 213, and it went over on the Senate side, and it has been languishing. It did not secure the 60 votes needed to even start the debate on voting rights in the United States Senate, and that's because of some archaic procedural rule called the filibuster. But we cannot be deterred. We have to, as AG Holder said, we have to not underestimate the power of our voices and the lessons that we learned in the past. Those same tactical, strategic lessons of our foremothers and forefathers in protesting on the ground. Rarely does progress actually occur in the halls of Congress. They bubble up in grassroots activism. And that's exactly what tonight is about. It's about really claiming our own power and making sure that we are, that we are protesting, that we are leading efforts to appeal to our senators, and especially the Senate leadership, an archaic rule called the filibuster should not stand in the way. And Alabamians know how important it is that we agitate, that we mobilize, that we organize. And I'm appealing to all of us to do that in the name of those foremothers and forefathers of Alabama's 7th Congressional District, who were real leaders, Amelia Boynton Robinson, F.D. Reese, John Lewis, so many known and unknown heroes and heroines of the voting rights movement. We should invoke them, and we should invoke their strategies and fight to make sure that we get H.R. 4, the John Robert Lewis, which would fully restore the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that was gutted in the Shelby versus Holder decision. And so I'm honored every day to represent Alabama's 7th District, which includes not only the people that are there now, making sure that they have the resources and the opportunities, but also the legacy that is Alabama's 7th Congressional District.
Thank you, Congresswoman Sewell. Obviously, we appreciate all the work that you do on voting rights and just everything that you're doing in Congress. We really appreciate you. The next question is, obviously, we've all heard a lot about the new voter suppression bills popping up in Southern legislatures across the nation. What do these recent bills and practices look like, and how do they infringe on our right to vote? And either one of you all can start.
I'll jump in. First, I do have to say thank you all for allowing me to be with you this evening. I want to shout out our Attorney General Holder, as well as U.S. Senator Doug Jones, and especially my Congresswoman, who is a true fighter and champion for voting rights, and just for all the people of the 7th Congressional District. Congresswoman Sewell, thank you for being our voice, our representative, and our champion. To your question, suppression efforts, truly, they've ranged from stricter voter ID requirements, stricter voter registration requirements. There have been cuts to early voting hours. The closing of polls early, changing locations, and of course, the one pretty consistent mass purges of voter rolls, as well as absentee and mail-in voting restrictions. I think these are all examples. When you add on to what the Attorney General said about gerrymandering, all of these things grouped together lessen the weight of an individual's vote. And so I think it's quite simple. These measures, without a doubt, everybody should know they disproportionately impact people of color. They impact young people, they impact students and the elderly and people with disabilities, making it harder for them. I think it makes it so harder for them to vote, either by limiting their ability to vote, increasing barriers, and to register to vote. And so this environment is not conducive. And truthfully, you're going to probably hear me say this more than once if I get the opportunity tonight. All of this is truly un-American.
Thank you, Mayor Wolfen. Would anyone else like to chime in on this question?
I think I'll just add that, I'm so glad to be sitting with you too. I'm growing up in the 7th District, living in the 7th District, and understanding that rich history. I think it's clear that, in some regards, I agree, Mayor Wolfen, that it's un-American, but I think that, it's un-American in the sense that it's not the aspirational America that we desire, right? Because it's what we're seeing as you said, Congresswoman Sewell, this is reaped in historical significance. But I want to talk about, just like, the weaponizing of the administrative state, right? The power that the Constitution gives states to deal with the time, place, and manner, and then taking that power and weaponizing it in a way to a surgical precision to make sure, as you said, Mayor, that people of color and other marginalized communities are impacted. And I'll give examples in this, the state of Georgia, for example, where it is notorious for the long lines. And I know, Senator Sewell, when you traveled last year, well, in 2019, to hear those testimonies, you came here to the state of Georgia and heard those testimonies in preparation for sponsoring the bill, which talked about how long the lines are in most Black communities. Why is that significant this year? Well, one of the things that people did to make sure that folks could burden and take those long lines was provide voter comfort in the form of water, in the form of food, in the form of battery charges, things to make sure that even though you were going to be in line for 8 hours in many of our communities, that you had the amenities that make sure that you weren't too hot or too cold, you know, and you could stay and actually exercise your right to vote. Well, Georgia decided to make it unlawful, right? To consider providing that comfort to be electioneering. And we all know what electioneering is, but that's what they did to make it harder for those individuals who live in communities with horrible infrastructure that make it so that lines are long, make it possible so that perhaps they may not stay in line, right? We see in places like Texas, where you essentially had, you know, in Harris County, which is the largest African-American county in the state, well, you see now where they were having 24-hour voting locations, where you had drive-in, you drive-up voting opportunities. Well, they specifically created a law to tear that down. So that's no longer available, you know, in Harris County. And so those are the kind of things that we see are surgically happening to marginalized communities to make it harder to vote. And again, it's that weaponizing of the administrative process that really is only in place, right, to make sure that everyone has access to the poll. It is not designed to prevent individuals from being able to vote, from having their name removed, from having polling locations and individuals coming to polling locations where they voted last voting cycle, but this voting cycle, they can't vote at the same location. And then limiting provisional ballot opportunities so that even if you find yourself at the wrong polling location, you may not be able to get a provisional ballot in the state of Georgia. So those are the kind of things that we see happening uniformly and nationally and in the southern states, but not just in southern states, because we see the same things happening in Wisconsin and the same thing happening in Michigan and Pennsylvania. And so we are, yes, so we are dealing with all of this all over this country. And so it's an important topic to be talking about, yes, even in Alabama.
And I just wanted to just say that after the most historic election, the 2020 election, where record voter turnout and voter participation, we saw more than 400 restrictive voting laws that were introduced in state legislatures across this nation. And 39 of those laws in 19 states actually passed and became law, including the one that you're talking about, April, in Georgia. Just giving someone a bottle of water is now a crime. I also just wanted to acknowledge the work of your husband, Cliff, and Latasha Brown in being founders of Black Voters Matter. And just wanted to acknowledge the fact that it is this new generation of activism that literally stands on the shoulders of the historic context of those amazing people who came before us and sacrificed before us. But we're going to have to all do our part. Restoring the soul of America is making sure that voter suppression does not reign.
I agree. And I think each of you kind of touched on this, but the next question is basically, how are these Republican majority legislatures getting away with infringing so egregiously on our voting rights? Are these laws constitutional? Are they being challenged in court? I know you have kind of spoken to those a little bit, but feel free to lean in a little bit more.
Well, look, I think that they're allowed to happen partly because many of the important laws that were really the product of Alabamians daring, having the audacity to demand that this nation live up to its ideals of equality and justice for all. It was, of course, in Birmingham, Alabama, where we had the Children's Crusade, and we had 4 little girls who lost their lives. Domestic terrorism in Birmingham that gave us the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And of course, the March from Selma to Montgomery, which provided us with the Voting Rights Act. But the reality is that those laws have been, the voting rights law has been gutted by Republicans who, control our Supreme Court, and ruling in Shelby versus Holder does away with the provision of pre-clearance. It used to be that states that were the most egregious violators of voter discrimination had to have their laws pre-cleared by the Justice Department before they actually came into existence. And that's no longer because of the Shelby versus Holder decision gutting it. And that's why passing and getting signed into law the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, the bill that I sponsor, is so critically important. It would restore that by giving a modern day formula to determine which states are the most egregious. So I say all this to say that the fact that we have seen state after state institute more restrictive voting laws, not just in Georgia, as April was saying, but in southern states, even states like North Dakota, where they make it harder to vote by insisting that you can't, that you must have a physical address in order to register to vote, knowing that in Indian country, most people have PO boxes. So this is not just a southern problem, it's a problem for across this nation.
And just to add to what the Congresswoman has shared, the question centered around how are Republican majority legislators able to get away with this? I think it's simple: gerrymandering. Look, through the years, gerrymandering, many GOP legislators have made their districts uncompetitive, and I think when it became uncompetitive, then there was no accountability to voters of the opposite party or to people that were, just right down the middle and centered on, or independent residents and voters to hold people accountable. I think when you add on the fact of Fox News and the paid media apparatus and all forms of media, they've been tasked with ensuring that these elected officials actually have a pulpit to continue to spew out not only egregious conversations, but they can defend what they've done without any blowback, because there's an actual created intentional audience for them to support these things, which is pretty outrageous when you think about it.
And the reality is that they can do this. The state legislatures can do this because, as April was saying, the states in the Constitution, I think it's Article 2, that this the place and the time, place, and manner is given to the states to determine when elections. But we also the federal government have to put these guardrails. That's what the VRA, the Voting Rights Act is. It puts up guardrails so that states can't just willy-nilly do these voter suppression laws without some form of federal oversight. And so without us getting the HR 4, the John Robert Lewis bill passed, there are no more federal oversight in operation. And so only Congress can pass a bill to determine a new formula so that Section 5, the enforcement pre-clearance, is once again enforceable.
Thank you. The next question is, obviously, you all know that we have a big election year coming up. How do you think these voter suppression bills will impact the midterms, and what should we be most concerned about at this moment?
Well,
I think they've said it. I think that, Mayor Wolfen just talked about, what's happening with the drawing of the lines right now. They are literally drawing lines in the state of Georgia, for example. And this, Congressman Sewell, Congressman Macbeth, who has been a champion, for many Georgians and folks all over this country, especially around the issue of gun, violence and changing those laws, was forced. They changed her district so much that she now is considering having to go into a neighboring, more friendly district that may find herself pitting herself against a newly elected, because we got a new, Democratic Congresswoman in Georgia. Now they may have to run against each other. So this is going to happen next year in the midterm. So we're losing in many of our states the hard fought, right, districts and Congress seats that we have. So we're going to start seeing immediate impact from this behavior and these laws in these states. We know for a fact that we're going to start seeing more of those rollbacks on the voter polls. They've already started in Georgia. We're not even ready for what they're going to start doing on the local election boards. You know, where you see in many towns, these same people who are embracing the big lie are now going to be taking over these local election boards, who will be having the specific oversight over, how elections are run and, voter challenges and things of that nature. That's what's getting ready to happen right now as a result of what's happening in these local state houses. So it is absolutely urgent. It is not even a little bit. Like me and a couple of people have been coming to DC now probably every 2 weeks, trying to get the Senate to actually deal with this issue of the filibuster, as Congresswoman Sewell talked about. But it is absolutely vital that things happen right now to provide those guardrails, or we're looking at losing major seats in Congress. We're looking at enshrining for the next 10 years, loss of very important state, not just federal, right, but also state jurisdictions, not just state. We're talking about county and municipal level. We are losing our ground and our power and our voices in these states. And that is what's happening as a consequence of all the things that, our panelists been talking about tonight, and including AG Holder.
So Jessica, that's a Ms. Albright, that's what you call a drop the mic moment. There's nothing else to add to what she said.
All right, well, I'm going to move us right along to our final question of the evening. And so it's one that probably everyone here who's viewing tonight is thinking about, but they want to know, how do we fight these bills and protect the right to vote for everyone? And what can we do in Alabama to protect the vote here and across the country?
I'll start us off with the very short answer. We must pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, period.
And I want to add that we know that we can't underestimate, as Attorney General Holder said, our own power. And our own power comes from our right to vote, our right to protest, our right to organize and mobilize, and try to influence these elections and influence the elected officials. And so I simply want us to remember the power that we all have in voting. So I often say that we must vote, volunteer, organize, turn out, and elect members of Congress, mayors, county commissioners, every election, participate in every election, so that we are making sure that our voices are heard. And so, yes, we have to definitely pass the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, but we must also take back our own power and vote.
And I'll just say that all of those things, and we've got to build out our tent. Yeah. We've got to begin in these states to see the commonness in all of us, right? Voting is not just a race issue, right? It impacts largely marginalized community, but that's not it. Voting is something that all people have a right to express, and we all should be fighting for it. But we've got to begin to grow our tent and find common ground. We've got to build our bases in these southern states. We got to organize ourselves, as we've talked about, but we've got to start to see the humanity in each of us. That may sound very trite and trivial. It may sound in comparison to, needing to protest and going to vote, but until we begin to change our mind about sharing power and control of resources in this country, until we begin to see that all people who live within these borders and are called citizens have a right to vote and be a part of deciding how resources are shared in this country, until we can begin to really adopt that mindset, we will continue to have to deal with, gerrymandering, voter suppression, and other laws that prevent every citizen from being able to completely and fully express the rights that were guaranteed the minute they became citizens. So I think we've got to do some work in Alabama. in other states. In Georgia, there's 95% of the people who are eligible to vote are now registered to vote. So you have more people who can participate in the process of what Georgia's resources and what are going to be the values of Georgia. And so in Alabama, we got work to do, in Mississippi and other places, but in Alabama, we are our best asset, right? And we've got to start knocking on doors, not just telling folk to vote for somebody, but telling folks that we got to start believing in each other and believing that we all have these rights that have been announced in this Constitution that we've heard about all night. So it may sound like a very trite and oversimplification, but I think, as Mayor Wolfen, if we can get that voter rights, if we can get the John Lewis Act passed, and also too, we need that other act passed too, that you've also were a part of, Congressman Sewell. We need
the Freedom to Act, which would make voting a national holiday. It would.
We gotta have it.
Absolutely.
So those are the kind of things that
think that
I think we may have lost the Congresswoman.
Support the great chairman of the Alabama Democratic Party.
Mr. Chairman, you're on mute, sir.
No, I wasn't trying to be heard at that point. I was actually speaking out loud. Congresswoman Sewell was giving me some props, and it went out.
Good to see you, Mr. Chairman.
Good to see. I want y'all to know, man. I'm fired up right now.
We want to make sure that we wrap up this conversation. Obviously, want to thank all of our panelists for being here. Really appreciate your contribution to this conversation and your lending your expertise and insight this evening. And now I will turn it over to our chairman, Representative Chris England.
Oh, wow, that was something. I really feel like I shouldn't say much else because our panelists, I think, pretty much put the grass where the goats can get it. But first, I want to say thank you to everyone that participated tonight, from our keynote speaker, Attorney General Eric Holder, to our host, and also our senator who should still be in the Senate, Senator Doug Jones. And I want to also just kind of especially talk about three panelists. My sister, April, I'm a little biased, but she is the best attorney in the England family. Clearly, if you couldn't see that tonight. I mean, she is dynamic and amazing. But also our two elected officials that participated, Mayor Randall Wolfen and our Congresswoman Terri Sewell. And I just want to stress the fact that you should be inspired, but you should also be comforted, because we are in amazing hands. It's not often that you find elected officials that are just as passionate as they are informed about the issues that are at hand. So when you have that combination speaking on your behalf, that you're whatever they're fighting for, whether they're advocating for, is safe, and you can have confidence that they're doing the best that they can do to protect those rights. And I couldn't be more happy to have Congresswoman Sewell standing in the stead for all of us in the 7th Congressional District, fighting for voting rights and making sure that she continues to protect the voices that we have. And she said it best. Bottom line is we need to pass those bills, but we need to end the filibuster. And we need to, because none of the things that we talk about matter unless we can vote, unless it's easy to vote and we can all participate in the process. And in order to make all those things work, I need to continue to ask for your investment in Democratic politics and in the Democratic Party. So for those who give, thank you. And we're asking for you to continue to give. And for those who are on the fence about giving, if you look at the team that's before you tonight, you should be inspired, and you should also be full of confidence in terms of what you're contributing to and what you're investing in. The work that we're doing is real grassroots work. So as Congresswoman Sewell, it bubbles up and it creates the elected officials and the representation that you see before you tonight. So again, I won't hold you any longer, but we are asking for your investment and your confidence and your support. So again, I'd like to thank everybody that joined us tonight, from the panelists to the speakers, and also you, the contributors and those who attended tonight and joined us. We appreciate you, we thank you, and we're looking forward to the days when we get the coronavirus under a little bit more control so we can all join together in person and fellowship. But until that point, thank you for joining us tonight. And if you ever need anything from the Alabama Democratic Party, we have a website. We're always available. And if you've seen across the state of Alabama, we're always there. So again, thank you, and everybody have a wonderful night.